The first one is calorie tracking, right? Has a huge amount of pros and cons, as we've discussed. Great for teaching you about food, great for being really anal with the diet, being like, if you wanted to get absolutely shredded, like calorie tracking is probably, like calorie and macro tracking is probably one of the best ways forward, right? Especially given that the only other option, if you're looking to get absolutely shredded, is to eat off a meal plan, because you need to control intake very precisely, right? Now, for the average person, look, it's just not necessary. You don't need to track calories to get the results that you want, right? However, again, as we've discussed, it is something that we like people to do at least once in their lifetime so that they build up that understanding, right? And this is one of those things where, like, you'll get people that come to you and they say, oh, well, I tried calorie tracking before, I just didn't like it. And then inevitably, when you go dig a little bit deeper into that, you're like, oh no, you tried eating in like a fucking 1,000 calorie deficit. No wonder you didn't like it, right? It wasn't the method that you didn't like necessarily. It was the poor diet structure that you didn't like, right? Or like they were just looking at calories. They weren't really looking at their macros at all. And there was no like food education or anything like that, right? So that is something that we need to be aware of, that if you do have someone come to you, or you feel like you in general are like, oh, I don't really like calorie tracking, calorie macro tracking, that it might just be the case that you've had actually poor diet setup, right? Now, of course, there are individuals that just don't like having to track their food, having to get out an app and figure out how much of this or whatever. And this is generally people who like to be way more, we'll call it spontaneous with the diet, right? They want to be like, right, I want to wake up in the morning and then decide what I'm going to have for breakfast. I'm going to go about my lunch like work, and I'm not going to have a lunch with me. I'll just be like, I'll get something in the shop or canteen or whatever, right? Like the same with the diet. They're like, all right, well, I'll have I'll have a few different options. Maybe I might get a takeaway. Maybe I might cook food. They have a few different options at home, but there's no actual forethought. There's no actual planning going into that. And they're generally, the more spontaneous and more, we'll call it chaotic someone is with that kind of stuff, the more averse they are to calorie and macro tracking, right? And well, that's not necessarily true, because a lot of people use that calorie and macro tracking to allow them to have that chaotic lifestyle with food, because they're like, right, well, I can actually eat whatever I want throughout the day as long as I hit these targets at the end of it, right? But generally what happens is, once you start calorie and macro tracking, you do start planning your food ahead a little bit better. You're like, okay, well, if I need to hit these targets, I need to have a little bit more protein at breakfast or lunch, because I can't stomach fucking, I don't know, 200 grams of protein in one meal at dinner time, right? It's like, it's not going to happen, right? So like, people do start inherently starting to plan a little bit more and going, okay, these are different breakfasts that I might have that fit in with my overall, calorie targets, macro targets, etc. Right? So generally, calorie and macro tracking works really well for people that are a little bit more anal with this stuff. They like to dial in, to the like very precise with this stuff, and also people that are like trying to get very lean, right? So it is a good tool. It can work for some people. It can not work for some people. It's not the be all and end all, but it is a fantastic tool. Do you have anything to say on calorie and macro tracking, Gary?
No, I think you covered that well.